can find them on the internet, but you won't find them on the Fox News website. You wouldn't after a few days. And he told this story, and I tell it in the book, plus a lot of other stuff about this. So, okay, let's have a look. We've got a spy ring. We've got the dancing Israelis with absolute obvious prior knowledge of the attacks. We have Michael Chertoff, who oversaw the whole investigation and let them go. And now let's look at the World Trade Center. The World Trade Center was owned by the New York Port Authority. And that was utterly controlled by ultra-Zionists. At the time of 9/11, a guy called Louis Eisenberg, a friend of Benjamin Netanyahu. He then agreed, for the first time in the history of the Twin Towers, to sell it into private hands, sell the lease into private hands. And he sold it to an ultra-Zionist friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, so much a friend, they used to talk every Sunday on the phone, Larry Silverstein.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
And his partner in this project, a guy called Frank Lowy of Westfield Malls fame, another friend of Netanyahu, and the person that provided the pressure to sell it into private hands was a guy called Ronald Lauder, ultra-Zionist, major at global level, from the Estee Lauder family, who was heading two privatization organizations in New York that recommended the privatization of the Twin Towers.
Severe, tough, real laws that will put these hate mongers away in prison for a long time. All world leaders, all politicians must lead in this effort. Words are not enough. Political speeches are not enough. Laws must be passed, severe, tough, real laws that will put these hate mongers away in prison for a long time. All world leaders.
Larry Silverstein bought the lease, and in his own personal contribution was $14 million. As a result of 9/11, he was paid out in insurance $4.5 billion. Soon as they got the lease, they dramatically increased the insurance in the case of a terrorist attack. The person who insured them initially was a man called Morris Greenberg of the insurance giant AIG, who was a friend of Kissinger, a friend of Netanyahu, all these people, usual story. But what Morris Greenberg did immediately, he had secured the insurance and the terrorist insurance for Silverstein, is he sold it on, reinsured it to 24 insurance companies and before 9/11, and they took the hit, not Greenberg. And what you had with the investigation or lack of it was a desperate desire not to get this into court, because then the evidence could be put before people in a public arena. So what they did was came up with a process of compensation for the victims of 9/11. And you would get a payout if you agreed not to take out civil action, basically. That was overseen by an ultra-Zionist called Kenneth Feinberg, a lawyer, who was also the man who oversaw executive compensation payouts, who got them and who didn't, after the financial crash of 2008. So he oversaw the families getting the compensation who didn't agree, who agreed rather, not to go into a civil action. But just under 100 families said, no, we're not taking your compensation. We want to know what's happened.
I think I saw a piece on 60 Minutes with him.
Right. But always ask yourself, what is the alternative? I have to come up with a projected loss and offer that to a claimant. Now, you want to talk about uncertainty. What if the claimant rejects the offer? Now the claimant goes forward uncertain as to his or her future, uncertain as to what the Gulf resources will ultimately demonstrate in terms of safety, uncertainty about a lawsuit, uncertainty about the cost of the lawsuit and the time expended. I mean, life is filled with uncertainties. And what I try and do is offer a certain result that is the best that I can come up with. It might not be perfect, but I suspect that the perfect is the enemy of the good in an area like this.
But at the same time, what is difficult for me to get is that, on the one hand, you're having to make dollar decisions about lives that no value can be placed on.
That's been the system in this country for 200 years. Money as a surrogate for worth, for loss, for damage.
But in your most philosophical moments, in your most humanistic moments, do you think this is a good way of doing it?
No, I don't. But, again, you have a better way?
Yeah, so then, yeah, and that civil litigation of the 9/11 families was overseen by an ultra-Zionist judge called Alvin Hellerstein and ultra-Zionist team in his team. And he was described as running a war of attrition against the families to make sure that none of them got to court. And I quoted from the New York Times article in the book where they're saying Hellerstein's just made another decision in the case, which has basically meant that the last standing family in 2011, I think it was, has now said, we're going to have to pull out because we can't win now he's done this. The case between the insurance companies who took the hit and Larry Silverstein about how much Silverstein got was overseen, judged by an ultra-Zionist judge called Mukasey, who later became Attorney General. And Silverstein's claim against airlines that got him a payout of millions was overseen by Alvin Hellerstein, ultra-Zionist judge.
All right, so it's a big ultra-Zionist web here.
Absolutely. But when I say ultra-Zionist, I'm talking about not Jewish people, not saying it's a Jewish plot. The vast majority of Jewish people, the overwhelming majority, have no idea what's being done, but they are being used as the smokescreen. Because what happens, as we talked about briefly in our last chat, we have, which is run at its core by the Sabbatean Frankist cult, what I call the anti-Semitism industry and the protection racket. And how it works is that anyone who gets close to uncovering any of this and much milder stuff and talking about it is immediately dubbed an anti-Semite, a Nazi, and all the rest of it.
Now, I know what they do because I used to ask them to do it. I mean, when I was in the Mossad, and we had a guy that gave us problems in the U.S., and he was speaking out, and he was talking like Pete talked once and said, Israel is bombing Lebanon with cluster bombs. We used to say, hey, who's that guy? You know? Pete Makaki, we used to call him. Yeah, which is Pete the cockroach. Because he makes a lot of noise and you can't get rid of him. So what you do is you get in touch with a guy in the station in New York or in the station in Washington. You say, tell the guys at B'nai B'rith to label him. And of course the campaign starts, and before you know it, the guy's labeled. And he's an anti-Semite. Because that's what we say he is. And that's one stain you cannot wash. Now, it shames me as a Jew to tell you that. But that's the fact. And it's wrong.
If you say no to the money, which bothers them a lot, because most influencers can't make money without these platforms. So when you say, I don't need your money, they're very, very confused as to why you don't want $50-60 million. Once you say no to the money, it becomes a protection racket. So the mafia used to walk into stores and say, people are going to break your windows. But if you pay us, we'll stop them from breaking your windows. And if you don't pay the mafia, they then break your windows themselves. It's exactly the same. They come to you and say, we have the leading PR firms in the world, and we have the leading legal teams in the world. So let's imagine something happened to you, Andrew. Let's imagine you got in legal trouble. We have the best lawyers. Let's imagine something happened to you and the media started saying you're a bad person. We have the best PR team. And what they're basically saying is, once you're under our guidance and protection, we sponsor the media. Nobody pays for advertising in the media because it works. It doesn't work. They pay for advertising in the media because it's a big bribe racket. So let's say I was sponsored by a clothing brand, and that clothing brand was giving X amount of millions to the media would not then attack me because they will not attack the poster boy for the clothing brand that pays them.
And that's the protection racket. And it's run ultimately at its core by this Sabbatean Frankist cult, which hates Jewish people. And this is why, as I mentioned in the last interview, if you're a Jewish person and you are criticizing Israel, this anti-Semitism protection racket will abuse you even more fiercely than non-Jewish people. Because it's not about protecting Jewish people at all. It's about protecting this cult. That's what it's about. And because of compartmentalization, many people in this ultra-Zionist protection racket will have no idea that what they're protecting is actually a cult that they actually don't know about. But this is the cement, this is the spider's web that allowed it to happen. Of course, you've got tremendous ultra-Zionist, Sabbatean Frankist control of the American media, which starts to explain why, not least CNN now, which explains why that obvious questions about 9/11 were never asked, and people like me just get abused for actually asking them. And I've just give you some headlines there in regard to the ultra-Zionist Mossad. Oh, there's another thing, too, which needs mentioning. In this sequence of events from Essa Harrell saying, you know, they're going to attack your biggest building, the Arabs, in 1979, in 1987, a security company called Atwell Security, which was run by Mossad and other Israeli intelligence agencies, personnel, and was a subsidiary of the Eisenberg Group of Shaul Eisenberg, who was a massive operator within the intelligence and military community on behalf of Israel. He ran Zim Shipping, dead now, but he ran Zim Shipping, and Zim Shipping vacated one of the Twin Towers at no notice 1 week before 9/11 and broke the lease to do so, just as an aside. And in 1987, the ultra-Zionist-controlled New York Port Authority gave the contract for Twin Tower security to Atwell Security. And the man who represented Atwell Security in that deal in America was one of the Israeli intelligence agents that kidnapped Adolf Eichmann in South America and took him to Israel for execution. And who oversaw that Eichmann operation? Issa Harrell. And Issa Harrell, people that worked with him were involved in this Atwell Security. The reason that Atwell Security lost the contract very quickly is when it was revealed that the president of Atwell Security had used a false name in the contractual affairs, contract. He was really a guy called Avram Shalom, who was a major figure in Israeli intelligence, who'd actually been exposed and had to stand down in Israel for ordering the murder of 2 wanted Palestinians by bashing their heads with stones. So that came out that actually this guy, I think he called himself Avram Bendor instead of Avram Shalom, and the contract fell. So the first attempt in 1987 to get control of the Twin Tower security was from Israeli intelligence there.
Okay.
In 1993, which you will be aware of because I think you were there at the time, there was the World Trade Center bombing in 1993.
Yeah. I was in Boston. I was about to go there. It was my first job at the company across the street, which is called Bankers Trust, and they had to walk down the stairs, and it was that garage bombing, wasn't it? That's what happened.
That's
and
right.
Took out a hotel
at the bottom, yeah.
Yeah.
So as a result of that bombing, which, by the way, as I show in the book, involved the FBI, and it also involved an intelligence agent from Israel. And as a result of that bombing, the ultra-Zionist controlled New York Port Authority decided we've got to revamp security of the Twin Towers. And they gave the contract to an ultra-Zionist security company called Kroll. In that same year of 1993, when Kroll got that contract, someone else bought into Kroll as a partner, Morris Greenberg, the man who arranged the insurance for Larry Silverstein, friend of Netanyahu. And so Kroll and ultra-Zionists, out of basically orchestrated from Israel, had control of security from then on right through to 9/11. And when Silverstein took over, of course, they had complete control of the building.
Can I ask you about the hijackers? Because we were all told that there were 19 Saudis, I think.
That's right.
That did the hijack.
They were mostly Saudis.
Okay. Yeah, maybe mostly. Under the control, ultimately, of Osama bin
Laden.
Laden.
That's another thing very quickly.
Yes.
Mostly Saudis. Sabbatean Frankist control of Israel, not Israelis, control of Israel. Sabbatean Frankist Donmeh control of Saudi Arabia. No accident.
Explosive claims from the man known as September 11th's, quote, 20th hijacker. CNN learned that convicted terrorist Zacarias Moussaoui recently wrote to two federal courts offering inside information about al-Qaeda and connections to the Saudi royal family. CNN's Deborah Farrick joins me here on set. You actually covered the Moussaoui trial, so you know a lot about this man. Tell us, are his claims being taken seriously?
Well, it's very interesting because even back then there were a lot of serious issues about what he knew and whether in fact he was crazy. In fact, he was diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic. But Zacarias Moussaoui has often been portrayed as the missing 20th hijacker. Now in a 4-page handwritten letter, he's reviving old claims that have so far been debunked that a specific Saudi prince and princess were involved in financing 9/11. However, Moussaoui takes it a step farther, claiming that Saudi embassy officials were involved in a plot to shoot down Air Force One and assassinate Bill Clinton and or Hillary Clinton during a trip to the United Kingdom. Well, he says that he met with a Secret Service agent several months ago and told him what he knew. To put it in perspective, Moussaoui's court-appointed trial lawyers back in 2006 portrayed him as a paranoid schizophrenic, and even 9/11 mastermind Osama bin Laden at the time denied that Moussaoui was part of the hijacking plot. He is in a supermax prison in Colorado. He is 8 years into a life sentence after pleading guilty to terrorism and murder conspiracy in connection with 9/11. But he's claiming in this letter that he was attacked in prison on orders of another terrorist, Ramzi Youssef, who's in the same prison, and he tried to get Moussaoui not to testify against the Saudis. So Moussaoui's asking for new lawyers, years. He says in exchange for what I can provide vis-a-vis information, he wants to be moved out of this H unit, which he calls a Saudi stronghold. He wants a warmer cell that's not infested with rodents, and he also wants his money back to buy stamps. So Moussaoui has been making these claims, but now the Justice Department is doing due diligence, and they are looking into it, even though a lot of reports, a lot of expertise has been put into determining whether, in fact, the Saudis were part of the 9/11 plot. Right, and they have repeatedly denied this, right? What has their response been? Well, they have, and it's really interesting because 9/11 families continue to sue the Saudi royals. And basically, lawyers for those families say, you know, the information that was provided is relevant, it's pertinent, and it could be critical. The Justice Department is taking its time, it's reviewing. However, the Saudi government in court papers has denied any involvement, financial or otherwise, saying that the Saudi kingdom was cleared many years ago. So it's still very much alive. And we know in the 9/11 Commission that basically it says that there's no clear evidence linking Saudi Arabia to 9/11, but there are 28 pages, right, of classified documents regarding Saudi Arabia. What do we know about that? Well, and this is what's so interesting, and this is really what keeps sort of the fuel going, because there are a number of allegations and accusations allegedly in those 28 pages of documents that have so far not been released. The person who put out the 9/11 Commission report said everything should be made public. It's been more than 10 years. The fear for some is that, in fact, it's going to renew allegations, accusations that simply aren't true. It's going to hurt the relationships between the U.S. and the Saudis. Also, some people say that the 28 pages, in fact, really show a much tighter relationship between Saudi royal family and George W. Bush, which many people knew back then at the time. So, again, until those are unclassified, this conspiracy theorists will continue to come up with their own theories about what's in those pages. Thank you so much, Deb Fayrick. We appreciate it.
But first, the case that could shed new light on one of the darkest days in American history. Nearly 23 years ago, after 9/11, new evidence could uncover secrets about Saudi Arabia's long-disputed role in the terror attacks. 10,000 family members of 9/11 victims have filed a federal lawsuit against the Saudi kingdom. They allege that senior Saudi government officials helped the al-Qaeda hijackers plan the attacks. A federal judge in New York is set to rule on an appeal from the Saudis, and if the judge lets the case move forward, it could uncover explosive evidence never seen before, including a video that allegedly shows a Saudi intelligence agent surveying the United States Capitol 2 years before 9/11. We've always been told that the terror group al-Qaeda acted alone, without the help of any state sponsors. But one fact always jumped off the page. 15 of the 19 al-Qaeda hijackers that day, as well as Osama bin Laden himself, were all Saudi. The Saudi government has consistently denied any involvement, and back in 2005, a joint report from the CIA and the FBI concluded there was no evidence that the Saudi government knowingly supported the terrorists. If that is not true, if what we've been told is incorrect, to put it bluntly, if that was a lie, it will change how we understand that chapter of our history, the wars that followed, and the long, complicated relationship between the White House and the House of Saud. Let's go to News Nation's Joe Khalil now, live for us from Washington. Joe, some families are calling this videotape a smoking gun. When can we expect a ruling from the judge on whether the case will proceed?
Well, whether these videos end up becoming public, we could potentially get a ruling from that judge this week. And you're right, we're hearing from the families of these 9/11 victims who say this is the closest thing to a smoking gun, the closest thing they have to a direct link between the Saudi government or some government officials and the 9/11 hijackers that they have had in nearly 20 years, which is the duration that they have been trying to pursue this case. And this evidence, mind you, is on video. Now, big caveat, Elizabeth, we have not seen this video. Very few people have. It's still under seal. It is not public. But what we do have are court documents from this ongoing lawsuit that describe in detail what you see on these videos. And a lot of that is disturbing. What these court documents tell us is that Omar al-Bayoumi and Fahad al-Thumairi, these are two Saudi officials, were, quote here, they were incriminated in videos of a welcome party from Bayoumi that he hosted for the hijackers, which has never been exploited by the FBI before. Another chilling video seized, just produced by British authorities, showing Bayoumi casing the United States Capitol for an attack. So this happened on American soil after the hijackers were already here, and on video, allegedly, meeting with officials from the Saudi government who had a welcoming party for them. And by the way, these officials, the FBI has already conceded publicly, they were on the payroll from the Saudi government. In some cases, the FBI said they were doing spy work for the Saudi government in the United States. There's even more in these documents, Elizabeth, some evidentiary papers that say that these guys were describing the specific mechanics for how to fly an airplane into an object that was on the ground. So very disturbing there. Again, we could learn more this week if a judge decides to make this public. And just one last thing I'll add, Elizabeth, is the only reason that these 9/11 victims' families are allowed to pursue this at all is because Congress just recently passed a bill allowing for it to happen. We're told the Saudi government and its attorneys now are trying to find certain loopholes in that law that would precede them from actually being prosecuted in this case. I'm also told senators now are passing another bill, they're working on it, that would shore up and strengthen the first bill to allow these families to move forward with their lawsuit.
Yeah, the Saudi government fighting this very hard. And we do know Bayoumi, who was the one who was videotaping the U.S. Capitol, was in the United States ostensibly to be a grad student. He was actually a Saudi intelligence agent. So that has been confirmed by the FBI. All right.
And most people don't even remember they were Saudis. They think they were Afghanis or Iraqis or whatever. But so you're saying it wasn't Saudis, it was Israelis? Who were the hijackers?
Well, that's an interesting point because there are so many anomalies about the hijacker story. If you take Mohammed Attar, he was called Mohammed Attar in America, but he was known as Mohammed El Amir, a student in Germany, an Egyptian student. And the descriptions of the personality of German El Amir and American Mohammed Attar couldn't be more different, including descriptions of their height, which seems to have several inches discrepancy. We are asked to believe, you see, that Mohammed Attar was the lead hijacker, and he was a virulent Muslim extremist, Islamic extremist of the kind of basically what's become ISIS, extremist, jihadi. I quote in the book his girlfriend in America, a lady called Amanda Keller. And she describes how she lived with Attar in the run-up to 9/11, a place I think was called the Sandpiper Apartments, in a place called Venice in Florida. And she describes, and she's a white American, seriously un-Muslim. She's girlfriend. And people at the apartments, which I quote in the book, confirmed that, yeah, they were together for a time. And she described how Mohammed Attar, Islamic extremist, was often drunk. His favorite food was pork chops. And he was a regular partaker of cocaine. And when he ran out of cocaine, because they followed him one night, they want to see where it came from, he went over to the flying school he was attending in Venice, which was a drug operation, by the way, involving the CIA. Venice Airport was a notorious conduit for drugs coming out of South America, etc. At that time, whether today, I don't know. And he went into the flying school with some people and came out with an armful of cocaine, and that's what happened all the time. This is the Islamic extremist that's supposed to have given his life to the benefit of Allah. We have another hijacker called Hani Hanjour. Annie Hanjour, according to the official story, was the man who flew Flight 77 into the Pentagon, so they claim, with a maneuver in a big 757 that, as I quote in the book, professional pilots that fly 757, 767 say they could not have done, including this extraordinary spiral that he's claimed. This man, Annie Hanjour, was banned 6 weeks before 9/11 from hiring a one-engine plane because he was so useless and dangerous at flying. Where are you, CNN? Where are you, New York Times? Where are you, BBC? Still today, Brian. Yeah, Annie Hanjour, he flew the plane into the Pentagon. That's what you get. You can fly a one-engine Cessna.
Hey guys, if you want to watch more clips, click here.
And if you want to watch the full podcast, click right here.